Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. Ever wish you could channel the imagination, creative freedom, and joy you see in your kids so you could have ideas falling out of your head all the time without fancy supplies you can't afford or use correctly, taking hours to meditate, or repeating boring affirmations all day? If this is you, you're in the right place. My Make Bad Art course comes back on October 14th, and I would love to have you. Make Bad Art is a gentle 6-week program designed to help you unravel the voices of perfectionism and self-judgment that keep you from starting anything, whether it's because you don't think you're good enough or you don't think you have all of the right materials and the right supplies or know how to use them correctly, or just have an inner critic that is out of control. We do all sorts of exercises, and I give you tons of tools to help you not only succeed in the moment, but keep those skills going for the rest of your life. Previous participants have described Make Bad Art as feeling like a tree waking up in the spring because they had forgotten how to have fun because they felt so constricted by the rules. Or like they have words literally falling out of their head all the time and are having more fun and just having a greater sense of lightness of being and looseness rather than feeling so tight and constricted all the time. If this sounds good to you, I would love to have you. And to thank you for listening to this show, there is a link in the show notes and a coupon code. There is a link in the show notes and a promo code, podcast, all in caps, that will take $100 off the price. If you have any questions, I would love to hear from you and help you out, so don't hesitate to get in touch. And now, here's our episode. Tony Stewart has made award-winning films for colleges and universities, written acclaimed software, and now has written his first book. That book, Carrying the Tiger, Living with Cancer, Dying with Grace, Finding Joy While Grieving, tells the story of Tony and his late wife, painter Lynn Catula, as they navigate her stage 4 cancer diagnosis, treatment, and hospice, and Tony's journey out of grief. Tony joins me to talk about his original journey from writing to software development, how it felt to return to writing via CaringBridge after Lynn's diagnosis, the process of writing Carrying the Tiger, the nature of grief, and more. I think you'll find a lot to think about in my conversation with Tony Stewart. Tony, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
Thank you, Nancy. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, as I know you already know, we start everybody with the same question. Were you a creative kid, or did you discover your creative side later on?
I was a super creative kid who then, through the whole middle part of my life, went off in other directions that most people don't consider being creative, although I would argue they are. But going back to my childhood, I remember bashing a hole in the wall of my bedroom to try and put when my parents were out, to try and put a follow spot or a spotlight in my bathroom so that it would shine through into my bedroom so that my sister and I could do theater with a spotlight pointing at us at the age of, I actually don't know how old, 10? Something in that range. I was already with my sister writing plays and putting them on for our parents, and they had bought me a light thinking that I would put it in the back of my bedroom, and instead I decided that was not right. When you go to the movies, they have a booth in the back, and I wanted something like that with a light shining through.
And you're still here to tell the tale.
I'm still here. That hole was repaired. I was given quite a strong talking to. So I wrote, I fell in love with making movies in 6th grade because of a project that was done by our school on my class to experiment with having us collectively make a movie. And in 7th grade, I started making movies and was a founding member of our school film club, directed theater, acted, all in like high school. And I also wrote like crazy, wrote poetry, wrote stories, spoke at some schools. I mean, they had me over to speak about it. So I was totally sure I was on the way towards some kind of creative path, fell in love with technical theater, that is to say, being a lighting designer, working, my summer job in college was being an electrician for the New York Shakespeare Festival, working Shakespeare in the Park here in New York City, things like that. If you if you've heard of the free Shakespeare in the Park in New York
Mhm.
City, that's part of what they do. I worked there one summer and other plays. And then I made films all through my 20s. I was a professional filmmaker, and I was paid to make. I'm sitting in New York City, and I should say I dreamed somewhat of being a Hollywood type filmmaker, but I never had the guts to like move to LA where I knew nobody at in my 20s and start there. And I had a girlfriend in New York. So I took the kind of jobs that were then available in New York. Now there's much more theater, TV and movies done in New York. Then it was like nothing. Um, I made for 8 or 10 years a whole series of movies for mainly for colleges, the best ones for colleges and universities, where they paid to have someone come and make I'll call it a pseudo documentary. We were given complete carte blanche to go up there, interview people. Carte blanche, except we had to find people who were attractive, racially diverse, gender diverse, etc., who could tell, like, we would do little profiles of them. And I won awards for these movies. These are really good 30-minute movies about colleges for which I was paid about $5 a week. And as I got towards 30 years old, I am, of course, exaggerating, but as I got towards 30 years old, I couldn't make money in that. And I was starting to make real money from making like profiles of Prudential Insurance's top agent for the year, which was soul deadening. And I fell in love with computer programming. And I switched. I mean, I was sort of pulled into it. This was an era when you didn't need a computer science degree. This was the 80s. Personal computers had just come out. I bought one to write film scripts on and ended up wanting software to run my own freelance filmmaking business and ended up writing that software because it didn't exist, taught myself how to do it, formed a little company, sold the software, got a rave review in the New York Times. My one and only rave review in the New York Times, which was for a piece of software that I wrote. And then I spent the next 30 or 40 years doing things that evolved from that, various different twists and turns. Uh, and I would argue, and my wife would argue, well, after she accused me of bait and switch, because she was an artist and a painter, and when I met her, I was making films and had just written a novel that never got published, but had just written a novel. And within a year, I had given all of that up and was writing software. So she totally accused me of bait and switch, said she fell for an artist, and who the hell was I now? But the reality was that for the next 30 years, she kept saying, well, actually, you're being really creative designing this software and doing these other things. It's just different than the creativity we imagined.
That's right. That is
So,
exactly right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
when we come back to my book, Carrying the Tiger, which is, what I love to talk about now, which is my new book that's out, that is a return, not that I've ever written a memoir before, but that is a return to the straightforward writing process and writing, creativity through writing that I had last done, 40 years earlier.
Yeah. Well, and I want to go back a little bit because being a Shakespeare nerd myself, I just have to know a little bit about doing Shakespeare in the Park, doing the behind the scenes and what that's like.
Um, it's generally it's generally like doing behind the scenes in any other professional
Okay.
theater, except that you're outdoors, and when it rains, you have to turn off the lights and then let them dry off. And then in those days, now lights are LEDs, but in those days they were more traditional bulbs. We had to very, very slowly bring them up to let the lamps warm up and burn off or evaporate the water that had accumulated. Things like that. And one time we were there when the New York City blackout of 1977 hit, and we were all in the park with 2,000 audience members in the middle of Central Park, and all the lights went out. And we had to help escort the 2,000 people to safety with no lights on in the park in an era when people considered Central Park more dangerous than we do
Yeah.
now. But most of it was like I did a lot of theater. I worked behind the scenes running lights and hanging lights and things on many shows in normal theaters. And it was really very much the same, except more hot and sweaty, no air conditioning, and there were some outdoor issues.
Yeah. Still, what a thing to have been able to do. That
Yeah.
just is so cool. So
Oh, I
and
loved it.
and also, your switch from writing and filmmaking into software is is so fascinating. I mean, writing software is still writing. It's just a very different kind of writing.
Yes. And of course, there are many different levels of writing software. There are many different types of software. Not all of it is the kind that you and I interact with. Now they would be apps. Then we didn't use the word apps. We called them programs, but still with a screen and images on the screen that you respond to and you type, you use your mouse and that guides you through from one screenful to another, depending on what you do. That's the kind of software I wrote. And if you think about it, I was structuring a kind of slideshow or movie. I was structuring an interactive experience with my users and trying to get them to accomplish whatever the goal was that the software was supposed to help them accomplish. That was a hell of a lot like designing a movie in many ways. And I discovered that my kind of fanatic, obsessive, compulsive, detail-oriented type A personality that I applied to making the movies worked really well when I was obsessively redesigning the screens and trying them out on different users and seeing what they did and realizing they weren't using them the way I wanted them to. And, oh, I have to tweak the screen because it's not their fault if the
Yeah.
screen doesn't guide you. So that's why the software came out well, I think, was because I was writing software that was like making a different kind of movie. But what I loved, which turned out to be an illusion later on, when I first started doing it, what I loved was that I thought, well, when I make a movie, even when most of those movies, I had a client, someone was paying me to make the movie. And I was completely at their mercy as to what they liked or didn't like. It didn't matter if I thought it worked. What mattered was whether the client, the university or college that was paying the bills, or the insurance company later, liked it. Then I wrote this software for myself called Tony Stewart's Home Office to automate my home office. And suddenly what it came down to, what I thought it came down to was, does it work? I mean, does it work are there bugs? When you click here, does it take you there? When an ordinary person sits down at the screen and starts doing it, do they figure out how to use it? And I thought that was so much more quantitative rather than qualitative. I don't know quite what to say. I mean, it was so much more out there and straightforward. And I wasn't going to get killed by someone taking what I thought was a beautiful scene and then saying, well, actually, that's too long, Tony. It's not working for me. Cut it in half, which was driving me crazy if I thought it was the best scene in the movie.
Mhm.
And now I had control and I thought, oh, this is so much more straightforward, cut and dry. I know how to do this. This is great. 10 or 15 years later, I discovered, as I did bigger projects for more complicated software projects, that one of the many things that most went wrong with software projects is that your end users didn't know what to ask for. And they would hire developers or hire a development company to write a program, and they would say, I need it to do X, Y, and Z. And you could write them a program that did X, Y, and Z and had no bugs in it, and it didn't solve their problem because actually they had asked for the wrong thing. What they should have said, and what we as developers learned to do, they should have said, I have this problem to solve. Would you come work with me to figure out how to solve it?
Yes.
So it turned out that user interactions were huge and that I couldn't predict how the users would react. And actually, it was a little like the films I had been making. But by then, I was just in love with this whole process. This was 10 and 15 years after I'd gotten into it.
That's so interesting, and it reminds me a little bit of, stories that I've heard from graphic designers who, they get the job, they think they've understood what they're supposed to do, they produce the thing, and they go back to the client and they say, "No, can you do it more this, and can you make it more
Yeah.
that?" And
Or
usually
red.
yeah, and usually in those cases, what the client's asking for violates every design principle known to humanity and all of that, and
Right.
they're like, "But you hired a designer." Why didn't
Yeah,
you
right.
know? And yet, it's kind of the same thing. It's like you have the designer or the software developer, and you have the client, and the client doesn't really know what they want.
Yes.
And you kind of have to read their mind, and instead of just assuming that they want good design or they want just an app that works, it's like, no,
Mhm.
there's all of these other things involved in what they actually want that they don't know or they don't know how to articulate. and you have to figure it out.
Yeah, in the case of software, uh, you could get instructions like basically, I need a home screen with the following button on it and the following text and the following checkbox. And when they click the checkbox, they're going to go here, and then this is going to happen. And if you built that, it would not work because the end user, that it didn't solve the problem. It didn't help the user do what really needed to be done. In fact, it may be that none of that functionality was what was actually slowing up the user. I was just suddenly in your talking, I was thinking, right, and almost with a grin, like we all hate where AI has come along and it can, write software for you, as it can actually write software for you. And you can tell it to design a book cover and describe what you want, and it'll generate a book cover for you. But that is basically the client who doesn't know what they're doing, having AI generate what they asked for. And you still, the role of the human being in this process is to get past that and to figure out what is the real underlying problem and to start suggesting how we might go at that. And also to have some sort of instinct or je ne sais quoi or whatever that is above and beyond um, something mechanical and programmable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you are going to try to get one of those, ChatGPT or Claude or whichever, to try to
Hmm.
do something like that for you, you really have to know how to explain what you want to get it from them. And that's exactly the same thing that you're talking about.
Well, even more, you'd better understand how to know what will work to solve what your real problem is and what might solve that problem. If I call all of this problem solving, even if it appears to be drawing a book cover.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think that's the piece that people haven't figured out yet about all
right.
of that. They think, "Ooh, it's a free thing," or cheap, in most cases, and it's gonna solve all of my problems. But no, if you don't know how to talk to it, it
Yes,
it cannot read your mind. Thank God for that.
I know. I agree with you. Thank God for that. I think creativity is such a wonderful thing, and they have not figured out how to bottle it.
Well, and I also wouldn't want it in my head, you
That's true
know?
too.
I don't
Yeah.
want those things in my head for any number of reasons, starting with there's enough in there already. But yeah, no, you have to know there's no simple answer. If you can't figure out what your own problem is and what you need to solve it, it's not gonna know that for you.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you got a real education on how to do that. You actually are probably exactly the kind of person those companies want to go train all of these things to figure out how to solve everybody's problems. But I'm not sure that it's that easy to distill into something that a machine can wrap its ones and zeros around.
I'm sure that it's not. I'm
Yeah.
absolutely sure that it's not. And headlines in this recent New York Times, it's in print today, but I saw it on my phone the other day, that this year's generation of AI is generating more hallucinations than last year's. They haven't. That stuff is wild and woolly, and they haven't figured it out. And I'm very happy that they haven't.
Yeah.
Let it summarize a bunch of web pages for me and just tell me I'm summarizing a bunch of web pages or I'm summarizing a bunch of user reviews on Amazon. It does a pretty good job of that. But that's different than trying to be creative.
Well, and it's probably better for it to go and read your user reviews on Amazon than for you to go and read them yourself.
Well, this is true. I am in the enviable position right now that my book only came out a couple of weeks ago, and the majority I now have more than 20 reviews on Amazon, which is like woohoo for a brand new unknown
Mhm.
author with a book that's only been out for 12 days or something like that, as we record this. And virtually all of them, all the people who chose to write words, and I believe they are real human beings, said lovely things. Fours and fives. Every single review where anyone bothered to write words, which is 22 reviews at this minute, said fours and fives. There are a few people who decided to click a three or even a two, and this is legitimate. My book is it's like about it's a memoir, but it has dying and grieving and coming out of grief and things like that in it, which is a hard subject. And if you pick up this book and read it, and it's not what you're up for, you could get really annoyed, pissed off at it, and give it a 2. But none of the people, one person gave it a 2 and several gave it a 3. They didn't write any words for me to read. They weren't willing to tell me why they didn't think it was a great book. Whereas the people who actually thought it was a great book so far have written beautiful things. So I'm very happy reading them. It's amazing how after a year and a half of working on this thing, when you finally get some reviews that come to you, how incredibly satisfying and soul-filling and all it is, because, of course, you're nervous for the whole time that no one's going to like the book.
Yeah, well, and especially with a book that is so personal.
Yes.
I mean, my book is a young adult fantasy novel. It's not, I mean, if you don't like it, oh well, it's not your cup of tea. I'm not
Mhm.
gonna, it's not gonna hit me on the same level as if, somebody doesn't like your book and comes in and says horrible things about it. That would just be, that's
I'm
why I was like, let ChatGPT read your
Yeah, right. No, I
reviews.
like that idea. And I will say that at this minute for Carrying the Tiger, the Amazon summaries, which is only at this moment a couple of sentences long, some of the reviews are many paragraphs. Um, I don't completely agree with what they chose to summarize. I've read all those reviews. The summary is accurate but limited, and given it's only a few sentences, it weights something about. It makes it sound like the whole book is about medical procedures, and it kind of hardly mentions the fact that the second half of the book is about dying with grace and hospice and then grief and then coming out of grief and finding joy again, all that stuff, which is why I wrote the book. It's true, the first half of the book is very much living with cancer, and there's a lot of medical stuff in it. But, you know, the, I think it could use about 2 more sentences of the AI summary to give a more complete picture, and I can't control that.
Right.
Um, But I'm still happy. I'm happy that a reader can come to Amazon and look at it and see that, and it's like, okay, cool. It's got a bunch of stars. The AI summary looks pretty good. Good. Maybe I'll try this book. Me as an author, I can't ask for more than that.
Right. Right. And that's, I mean, I think the real power of Amazon, since it is the site that everyone goes to for this,
Yes.
I mean, ordinarily I don't like to single out sites, but here we are, is the customer review. I mean, that's always been their
Yeah.
secret sauce. And
Yeah.
so, when you go to read it, I mean, when you were talking about the lower star reviews with no comments, I always find those frustrating as somebody who's sizing up a book, because I want to know why you said that,
Well,
you know?
exactly. I would much rather that the 2-star person would say, because then someone else reading the reviews will immediately click and say, show me the lowest rated reviews, if they're that personality, they want to see them. And there it would be. And they'd be able to see, oh, this person didn't like X, Y, or Z. Oh, that does apply to me. I don't think I want to read this book. And for me, Tony Stewart, as the author, that's fine. If this is not the right book for you, I don't want you to read it and not
Right.
like it and then give me a 1-star review. I'd rather you just go find a book you want to read. And it's, all of that. But on the other hand, someone might click the 2-star review if they had written a few sentences and say, oh, well, I see where they're coming from, but I don't think that's going to apply to me. And then they might look at one of the 5-star reviews and say, that sounds more like me. And then they'll buy the book and hopefully really enjoy it because it is what they're looking for.
Right. It gives you a much better picture as someone trying to decide, is this a book I'm
Yeah.
gonna enjoy reading? And so when they're not there, it's like, come on, you can't help
Come
me
on.
out.
Yeah. Help me out. Write me your bad review.
Yeah. Yeah. Though the bad reviews the book came and it looked like somebody's dog had chewed on it. I'm like, that's not helpful. That is
Yes,
not helpful
exactly.
at all. The author had nothing to do with that. It's nothing to do with the book, But and I will say, this is my periodic reminder to listeners of this podcast. If you read a book and you liked it, please go and leave a review for it. If you read a book and you didn't like it, go and leave a review for it too, for all of these reasons, and because it helps authors out and we appreciate it. We love you every time you leave us a review.
Thank
Same
you.
for podcasts, same for music. Anywhere you can leave a review, go leave a review.
Yeah.
So,
Well
yeah.
said.
So you mentioned that this was the first time that you got back into writing, conventional
Hmm.
writing, after you
Yes.
started doing software. So how was it to get back to make that switch again? I mean, I assume you really started with all of the posts that you were putting online, going
Yes.
through this process. And as I was reading the book, I was just there were certainly moments where you also noted, the healthcare system is nuts. This makes no sense. This is crazy. I was like, yes, that is
Hmm.
true. But seeing it in print and in the kinds of circumstances that you described that are certainly much more than I have to drive across town to go get my stupid routine X-ray or whatever,
Right.
made it even more abundantly clear. And you were posting all of these things for friends who were cheering you on for this situation that was ongoing and, you know, very real, and everyone's hoping for the best. So
Yes.
it's more than just keeping your own private diary.
Yes. It's an interesting hybrid, and I would say if you had told me at the get-go that the minute Lynn's so just for the listeners who don't necessarily
Yeah.
know, so the book is Carrying the Tiger. The subtitles are Living with Cancer, Dying with Grace, Finding Joy While Grieving, which corresponds to the three major sections of the book. And it starts on the day that my late wife and I learned that she had some major unexpected tumors, which turned out to be stage 4 cancer. Um, and it ends several years after she died, keeps going after she died, when I start to be able to move forward again. That's sort of my summary. But the reason that it became that I began writing, as you just were explaining, Lynn had a lot of friends, and in the first week or so, we tried sharing information with our friends by email, and we were deluged with emails flying back and forth just when we were scrambling to go to doctors and we were terrified. And then someone told us about this nonprofit website called caringbridge.org, where you can set up a little mini, like a stripped down Facebook, and you can journal there and post there, and your friends can read it, and then they can write comments, and it's all asynchronous, and you just have to post the information in one place and not be doing all these emails. And then you can go read the comments at your convenience. So we started doing that, uh, and Lynn asked me to do most of the writing because going back for years, I'm so comfortable writing, even though I hadn't written for anyone else for years. But from the very beginning, when I started, there were, I don't know, 15 friends who had signed up for it. And I knew all of them. And I basically was writing relatively unemotional stuff. I mean, it's scary. The subtext is scary, but it's like, we got this information. We don't know what's going on. Here's the doctor that we're going to go to. We've got an appointment for Wednesday. And then Wednesday night, here's what happened when we went to the doctor. Oh my God, it was so much more than we thought. We ended up running around town and going to a neurosurgeon on the same day. But still, it was all this breathless. But I wasn't writing a book. I wasn't writing for strangers. It was a little different. In fact, I've never done a diary or a journal for myself. It's almost like I needed an audience, or I probably wouldn't have written anything, but it was an extremely safe audience. And it started there. And then the fact is that Lynn and we found some miracle drug, a clinical trial that actually extended her life by years compared to the 1 or 2 years that she was originally predicted which she would have. And so this went on for years. And there were lots of twists and turns and ups and downs during those years. It wasn't all smooth sailing, although several of them were very good. But I got used to writing these posts, and more friends followed along. And eventually we had 200 people reading the posts because Lynn was I would say 90% of them came from her life and her friends, many of whom were shared friends by that. We'd been together 30 years. We were married. We'd been together 30 years before this started, so pretty tight. But she was the more active social one. I'm more of an introvert. So then over time, I was writing these. We were getting great feedback from our friends like this is really helpful. Thank you. Keep going. I, I like reading these. I mean, thank you for keeping in touch with us. And by the way, you're a really good writer, Tony. These are really interesting. And so they became more emotional. I got more addicted to them. And so when things started to go bad, when we went into hospice, we stopped taking the treatments and Lynn was going to die. I found that I not only couldn't stop, I was writing, these words were coming out of me in the middle of the night about what the day had been like and what conversation I had with Lynn that day. Just a few words. it's really very special to be talking to someone who knows she's dying.
Mhm.
You don't get that very much in your life, and I treasured that time, and to be able to let her know how much I loved her and all that stuff that was really, really beautiful. Um, so by then, they were no longer factual posts. They were a little factual, but they'd become much more meaningful and deep from my point of view. And then she died, and I wrote a few paragraphs. I can't remember exactly how much is in the book, but basically saying, I guess this is it. I probably won't write any more posts because she died. And this was her story. And then 2 days later, I wrote a post because I couldn't stop. And that's when we get into my grief. And there's like nothing to say except what it was like to go through each day of grieving and what that felt like, which also turns out to be a little unusual because you don't often see someone who was journaling and writing and has this material of what day 5 of grieving and what day 10 of grieving felt like. And that's a really complicated and confusing time. So, anyway, I got really invested in all of this. The posts were helping me. I was getting this feedback that they were helping other people. And ultimately, years after Lynn died, but starting probably in that period of deep grief, I'm going to pause here for a second. When someone you love dies, one of the many aspects of deeply grieving is a desire, and this is almost universal, but you don't always realize it this way, a desire to somehow get to the point where you find meaning in that. There's a whole book by David Kessler, who's a grief.com expert, wonderful guy, wonderful writer, called Finding Meaning, in which he explores this question of how and it may take years, you kind of the best you can get to is when you've assimilated the grief into your life, and the icing on the cake would be feeling like you found meaning in the loss. It becomes almost something you can treasure. That's vastly simplifying it. But if we go back to that month when people were saying, please keep writing, I love reading your posts, I started to get the inkling that I could make something positive and meaningful out of Lynn's death if I could eventually publish these posts as a book. And that's where the idea started. But it wasn't until 3 or 4 years later that I reached the point emotionally where I could start like turning them into a book. And then it became a project like writing any book. And it took me more than a year to do that.
Yeah.
I don't remember if I asked, did I answer your question? Do you remember what your question was?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's so interesting reading the book because, first of all, it really struck me by the end of it, like, how recent all of this really was. I mean, the story starts 10 or 11 years ago,
Yeah.
but it really, I mean, I don't know when you finished writing the book, but it can't have been all that long ago.
I wrote the epilogue to the book a year ago, January. So January
Okay.
2024.
But it's, I mean, there's so much in there, and what really struck me too is that, you write that book. First of all, that you wrote it in present tense. I thought that was fascinating
Mm-hmm.
because it is so much more real and brings us as a reader into it as if it's happening now. But I also wondered, y- you know, I don't know if I could have written a book like that in present tense because it brings you back into the present moment of it too, which feels tricky.
I I thank you for saying that. I love it. The process of writing the book, and I'm going to come directly to what you just said about the present tense. The process of writing the book, once I came back to it in 2023, the process of writing it was iterative. And the first thing I did was simply to take all the Caringbridge posts, which amounted to 700 pages when I printed them out, a ton of material, uh, and edit them. And just like I wanted to find out, if I edit them, is there a story here that's interesting to read? The posts were basically all in the past tense. They might be describing what happened that day, like I wrote it at night and I described what happened that day, or they might be describing yesterday because I didn't write one literally every day except during hospice. Um, so I had this material and I decided that, yeah, there's something really cool here. In fact, I thought I was done. I had worked on the book for 2 months. I had edited these posts down to a couple of hundred pages, and I thought, "This is beautiful." I loved the posts. And I lived with that for about 1 day before realizing no one is ever gonna wanna read this because they don't know me, they don't know Lynn. These were written for people who know us well. And you would stop reading about 5 pages in. Who are these people? Why should I care? So then I started actually trying to write it as a book, in which I realized that I couldn't do it all in the posts, and I also needed to add tremendous amounts of material that went in between the posts because I hadn't said everything by any means in those 700 pages. And the book became a dance going back and forth between what's in the posts and what's in between them. And I played around with tense. This is where we come back to it. I sat down there and I wrote the bones of what is now the first chapter, the bad news chapter, and I wrote it in the past tense. And then I took the exact same thing and I changed the tense to the present tense. And I thought, oh, this feels better. And then I did a dance for the next 9 months of moving material in and out of the post format. So when you read the book right now, less than half of it looks like quotes from posts. And they are quotes from posts, although they are edited. Probably maybe a quarter of it is in posts at most. And the start of the book, hardly anything, and they slowly start to come in. That was one of the biggest creative questions for me, and it totally reminded me of film editing, was I could say anything. I mean, here I would have a post that described in detail what happened one day, like when we went to New Haven and then came to Sloan Kettering the next day. That was all in a post, all in the past tense. It was written after the second day. And I sat there looking at that and I thought, I think this felt so real and immediate to us at the time. I'm going to take all of this and put it in the present tense. And actually, this is a bad example because that section remained in the present tense. But I might take another one and say, let me put it in the present tense and get it out of the post. The same exact material that was originally in a post. And then I would go, yeah, but I'm going on too long in the present tense. It's getting too breathless. I need to pause. I need a structural break and an emotional break. Let me take this part of it and put it back into the post format, where you suddenly get pulled a little bit away from the forward breathless motion, and you're looking at it from the point of view of reading a post, and it goes into the past tense because the posts were in past tense. This is the same few paragraphs. I've been doing not a search and replace, but a type and replace, turning verbs into past and present tense, going back and forth. So much of that book went back and forth between past tense and present tense as I worked on it, as I tried to find a rhythm and a pacing and a structure that would keep you wanting to turn the pages and feel satisfying.
This makes sense to me. I'm remembering in my MFA program when they had us do something similar and just take, 2 or 3 pages from the whatever it was we were each working on, and just redo it in whatever, whichever tense we hadn't written it in, just to see what would happen. And I kept thinking, it's not going to make that big a difference. It made a huge difference.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so surprising.
Each section, in my book, each section wanted to be, ultimately, I feel like it wanted to be in one tense or the other.
Yeah.
And interestingly, like I think of the book, so the 3 parts, the living with cancer part in the book and in real life felt like being in a thriller, large parts of it. So I thought, okay, I need to write this. I need to structure and write this a little bit like a thriller because that reflects what it felt like. So there are very few posts, especially in the first 50 pages. They slowly start to come in because the posts take you out of that thriller mode. They become more reflective and they're looking back on it. And then as I go on, I introduce more posts. You get more used to reading them, and they become a little more seamless. You don't, as a reader, hopefully notice consciously, oh, I'm in a post now. Whereas the first time one appears, it's very obvious, like, oh my gosh, he's changed into a different format. But anyway, I tried to keep that mode going. There are like cliffhanger chapter endings and things like that, because damn it, that's exactly what it felt like to live through that. But then you get to hospice, and suddenly the book and life slows down to almost no forward motion at all. The hospice only lasted 2 weeks. She died 2 weeks after we decided to start treatment, and those 2 weeks felt like they went on for 6 months. So there, every other page is a post. I'm really slowing it down. And I mean, I'm saying this, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging. It's more like, oh my God, I can't believe I managed to find this rhythm. It's almost as if someone
Mhm.
else wrote the book when I'm talking now. That guy, Tony Stewart, in the year he spent doing this kind of back and forth stuff, arrived at things where when I look at them now, I go, wow, that was a good choice. In a classroom setting or a critical conversation, you say things like, well, he made a really interesting choice there. What
Yeah.
it felt like to me was that over a period of months of experimenting and editing it different ways, I arrived at a structure that felt good to me. And looking back at it, I can see how I'm slowing things down and then even more for the next chapter, or about the same, which is my shattered chapter when I'm in deep grief, the very beginning of deep grief, when you just don't know what the hell, I don't know what the hell's going on. And the days are like very confusing. Um, and then I start coming out of that and having the posts get further apart again. And it accelerates as I start coming out of the deep grief and finding some joy in my life. And so I ended up with a structure that I'm extremely happy about. And I think you could talk about it in a literature class, or an MFA kind of program.
Mhm.
Um, but there is always that illusion that the author, it isn't always an illusion. Some authors are really clever and plan that out and know from the get go they're going to do this kind of structural change. And it took me months and months and months to find it.
Yeah, if you had to do something similar again, you would say, "Oh, I could do it like I did in this other book." But, without that kind of experience, it's trial and error. But
Yeah.
I think you found it. I think it works because I certainly had not noticed that it took a while before the posts started showing up and that the rate of them had changed at all.
Hmm.
You know? So it did its job, and when you talk about parts of it being like a thriller, yeah, you definitely have that breathless feeling of, "Oh, wait, we're in this part of town, and now we have an appointment that we have to get to at this other part of town or in this other state, and we only have this long to get there," and, yeah,
Yep.
it is really it's a wild ride for a
Yeah.
lot of it.
Yeah.
And what really struck me too is, and I figured you had all of these posts to help you out, but like how clearly you remembered things that happened at different times. And yet you're saying that you filled in a lot. I assume that those posts helped you remember the details of what was going on, but still, it's a lot of things to have remembered.
I would say my memory is not better than anyone else's. The posts gave me the starting point, and then the iterative cycles of writing, I kept remembering other things. The last few pages of the book were to appear, or a few paragraphs, I added while I was recording the audiobook, because the process of recording, when I thought it was finished, when I thought it was locked, when we already had galleys, I was recording the audiobook and all these emotions were coming flooding back. And suddenly I remembered something and I went, oh my God, I really want to get that in there. So I wrote 4 paragraphs that are in the final book but weren't in the galleys. And I was recording the audiobook so I could just record them and added them. That's at the very end, but that kept happening for the whole year. I would write something and think about it and then go forward and then go, oh, wait a minute, and then go back. Um, it didn't all come to me. And there are some conversations that it's like, I don't remember that exact conversation. One of the most important conversations, not to the emotional flow of the book, but just to the factual of it, is where Lynn says, it would be nice to believe in an afterlife now. And we talk a little bit about how, and I talk about how neither of us is religious. And I recreate a few lines of dialogue that we had. Well, that's actually like a composite of 3 or 4 different conversations, and of course, I don't remember the exact things we said to each other, and I sat there almost like a novelist would,
Mhm.
saying, "I need one scene. I need to do this in one scene, and I need to get out there this information because I want you, the reader, to understand, are we religious? Do we believe in heaven? Where do we come from on these things?" Which we did talk about, but I don't remember exactly
Right.
any of those specific conversations. And I ended up putting it in there as if I had this amazing, perfect memory of that one night.
Well, that's what memoir is, right? It's
Yeah.
it's a blend of of reality with a little fictional twist here and there
Yeah.
to make it all make sense and flow a little bit better. But
Yeah.
that doesn't make it any less true.
No, I mean, I'm attempting to recreate the truth of it, even if I don't always remember the specific details. There are other scenes in there that I remember vividly. There the 2 scenes at the little table where we held hands and said things to each other. The second one especially, where she says, "I want you to have a girlfriend. I don't want you to have a girlfriend." Oh, that scene is, that memory is still with me
Yeah.
now. That was such an important thing. It burned its way in. I wrote about it very soon afterwards in Caringbridge, which is great. So now I have the marker for it, but that helped keep it alive. So there are a lot of touching scenes in there that I totally do remember. But then there are the others where you say, I need to construct this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think one thing that certainly worked for me is that, obviously I never met Lynn, but
Mhm.
reading this book, I feel kind of like I did. And so, like it's this window into somebody else's life that just starts to feel really real by the end of it, in a way that's like, obviously I picked up the book knowing this was a real person, but that's different than feeling like this is somebody that I could have known by the end of it. So, I think I'm sure that that was kind of your goal, and I think that you certainly achieved it.
Thank you. I'm smiling broadly, which none of our listeners can see. I didn't want to interrupt you while you were saying that. I worked so hard on that. I worked so hard on that. Um, Trying to pick the right memories. I mean, in the first chapter, when we go into the flashbacks of how we met and some of the things we did together, and then some other flashbacks that occurred during the book of things that we had done together years earlier, you know, well, this is, as I said, when my first draft of the book, which was all these Caringbridge posts edited together, the entire problem, the biggest single problem with it, besides that it didn't have rhythm, it didn't have exactly the kind of rhythm that I later worked on, is that you didn't know who Lynn was. I just talked about things that we did going to one doctor or another, and you didn't know who Lynn was. And this is a love story,
Yeah.
and so I worked very, very hard to try and find these little moments. Uh, I was so happy. There's that moment in the book where we're at a doctor's office, and I start trying to talk for her, and she whacks my leg and says, "Shut up. This is my story. You don't know what I'm thinking." And I
Yes.
remembered that late in the day before recording the audiobook, but I remembered that late in the day. I think the copy editor had already sent me back the manuscript when I remembered that. And I said, I got to get this in there because that is Lynn. She's alive. And it was a totally real moment. Um, I was so happy. And did a little jig like that's what I want in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. That was definitely a moment that made me smile. It was like, yeah, she's not gonna get pushed around by anybody.
That's right.
Even in the tiniest little ways. She's gonna
Yes.
run her own show here.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, she comes through very clearly, for sure.
I'm really, really glad to hear that.
And I wanted to make sure that we get a chance to talk about the grief side of it, in part
Mhm.
because, you mentioned that you're becoming a grief educator, which I think is amazing.
Thank you.
And also because for me, that was the section of the book where there were a couple of times where I had to just take a break.
Mhm.
And I think because that's the part of the book that I could relate to more directly.
Mhm.
I mean, I've lost an uncle, my grandparents, but nothing as close as
Right.
a spouse or a parent or, a brother or anything like that. But, I remembered as I was reading how, my paternal grandmother took,
Mhm.
not at all the same length of time as in
Mhm.
this story, but still, she had a whole set of circumstances and had over several months kind of descended into a kind of like I don't know, I'm sure there's a better name for it. I call it hospital induced dementia for want of a better word, that didn't leave.
That didn't leave because you know that Lynn had hospital delirium,
Yeah.
hospital-induced dementia, which did which scared us to death, but did leave after a few months. because she was younger at the time than
Right.
a
Yeah. My
grandmother could
grandmother
have been.
was 92.
Yeah,
So,
definite.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in her case, once she had it the last time, it did not go. So it was
Yeah.
as if she had had Alzheimer's, even though it had only been
It's
around for a couple of months.
it's exactly what it feels like. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
horrible, and most of us don't know about it. I never heard of this
Yeah.
until it happened to Lynn. Scared me to death, scared her to death.
Yeah. But it became clearer and clearer. We had to move her into a memory unit and that kind of thing.
Mhm,
And it became clearer and clearer that she was not going to come out of it.
mhm.
And my dad told me, I think actually right around, it must have been when we all got together for the memorial. And it was like the weekend after she passed. And, I said, I feel oddly not a lot. And he said, yeah, me too. But the minister tells me that when you've seen this coming, you kind of grieve in advance. And so we all thought that that was kind of hilariously in retrospect, oh, we're done. No big
Yeah,
deal.
exactly,
We got a,
exactly.
get out of grief free card because we did it already, which is
Mhm.
not how it went.
You can grieve in advance, and then you still end up grieving after the fact.
Yes. Yes. And in that particular case, I also lost my uncle 3 months later. So I got a
Ah,
double whammy of it.
yes.
And that was when I learned, and I think you said this at some point in the book, that like you can't predict it. You don't know when it's going to hit you. You just kind of go, something, I feel really weird right now. Oh, right, that's the grief thing. Okay, it's doing its thing, and it's just got to run its course, and I have to let it do whatever it's going to do, and
And let
it'll
yourself
pass.
feel it. Exactly.
Yeah,
If you try and suppress it and run away from it and hide from it, it's just gonna sit inside you waiting to come get you later,
yeah,
sometimes many years later,
and that's no fun.
and is no fun. It can screw up your life, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But, so, I mean, I don't know, uh, I almost wanna say, is there a question here? But I can riff on it.
But no,
Yes.
I mean, because it seemed to me like reading the book that certainly if that were true, that you could grieve all of this in advance, that
Yes.
never would there have been a better instance of someone
Of
who should have been done, than in your case. And clearly that just
it
ain't how it works.
that ain't how it worked, and that's actually in the book, we get to the end of the chapter called Traveling, which is the end of the hospice section, the end of the dying, that part of the book. In the subtitle on the cover, it says Dying with Grace. In the book itself, I was much more hard hitting. It's just called Dying, the whole middle part of the book. And she dies. And I wrote a post in real life a day or so after she died in which I was imagining, wow, okay, I feel pretty good. And probably because we saw this coming and we said our goodbyes and we said all these beautiful things to each other, and I've been mourning or grieving her impending loss for years. Maybe my grief will be shorter or shallower than it would otherwise be. Well, than it would otherwise be, we'll never know. But guess what? What happens to many, many people is that in the immediate aftermath, you go into shock. It's just like any other kind of shock. You don't feel it. And so for a few days, I was in a kind of shock, taking care of some business and stuff. And then hell, it just descended on me. So the next page of the book, which is the start of section 3, begins, first comes denial. I tell myself that because my grief was exactly what you and I just talked about, because I saw it coming and she had a great death and it was beautiful, it's going to be shorter or shallower. But oh no, when the grief comes, there is nothing you can do about it. And then I plunge you into what it was like for me, which was very much like being adrift in a stormy sea, you know, without a raft. And that's, I think, I mean, I do want to say really clearly one of the things I've been learning in the grief class, and I kind of knew it instinctively, is everyone's grief is different. What I do in this book is tell you about my grief and tell you what it was like for me. And if you really love, the one truism is the more you love the person or thing or pet that you lost, the more intense your grief, because the grief comes straight from the love. and it comes from the loss of the future you had imagined and hoped for. And
Yeah.
that's what usually we're grieving, is the loss of more time together, or we'll call it more time together, and whatever that meant, more events together, more companionship, more love.
It makes
So
sense.
yeah, but so my grief was really intense for a while. And then I think partly because of the journaling I was doing, possibly because after a few months I met Cordelia, which is this whole latter part of the book, and starting another relationship, which I write about tremendously. It's not easy, folks. It was tremendously confusing and made me feel shame and guilt. But anyway, it did happen. So many people who start out in such deep grief as me, year, 2 years, 3 years of really debilitating periods of grief. In my case, the grief is still with me today. Just a few weeks ago, I was crying in the kitchen over. I took a bowl out of the cabinet and remembered when Lynn and I bought that bowl, and I started to cry. And this is more than 4 years after she died. But it gets smaller and smaller, and I came out of the really difficult, obstructive, grief, the kind that makes it very hard to keep going forward. But in our society, it's very common to say to each other, my gosh, 6 months have passed, come on, let's go do something fun together. And guess what? 6 months is a blink of the eye for someone who's deeply grieving, if they're having that kind of grief. There are people who truly grieve, but actually start to cope very quickly because their form of grief is very different than mine was. I've learned this. Everyone's grief is individual, and you don't project your own idea of what it should be on them. And I should not project my own idea based on my grief on anyone else and assume that if they don't behave like me, they're not grieving, or that they're hiding it, or sublimating it. Not necessarily true. You don't know.
I think that's so important because you do hear that so often. You know, why are they still so upset about this? It's been so long and it didn't take me
Yeah.
that long. And, I
Yeah.
mean, I think,
And it was only their dog, or something. It was only
yeah,
this, and they had a beautiful life together, or whatever. There's all of these. It was only this comparison stuff. It's all wrong. You can't. Everyone gets to have their own grief, and for some people, it is over the top, unbelievably debilitating, for their pet, for the person who died in their arms after a long illness, who was 90 years old and had a beautiful life. Doesn't matter.
yeah. But I think our society is so uncomfortable with people being unhappy
Yes.
and especially being openly unhappy and not
Yes.
being able to just get over it,
Yeah.
that we don't understand and we don't want to understand. And I think that there's probably also a layer of, ooh, if that's happening to that person, that could happen to me, and I don't want to think about that, so we're just going to block that off and pretend it's not happening, and
Mm-hmm.
say what's wrong with that person because that could never be me. And
Right.
oh yes, it could.
Oh, yes, it could. You don't know what your grief will be like until you are in it.
Yeah.
I cried so much more than I ever expected. I mean, I am a bit of a crier, but and there are some sad movies where I really did cry at the end. So I'm not the kind of guy who completely holds it in, but oh my gosh, these floods of tears many times a day, that was me. I would never have told you that was going to happen.
Yeah. But I'm glad that you've told us now so that people can see it and see
Yes.
that it's normal.
Well, that last thing you just said, when people ask me, why did I write the book? The biggest reason that I wrote the book as I did and chose to put the things in it that are in it, I wanted to say, it's all normal.
Yeah.
Look at all these things that happened to me. Look at all the shameful thoughts I had. Look at the little breakdown I had because I wasn't taking care of myself. Look at this grief stuff. Look at all of these things. Look at Lynn having diarrhea in a public place on her way to the bathroom because the drugs gave her diarrhea and she couldn't get there in time. Guess what? All of this was our version of normal. And I just wanted to normalize it. It won't necessarily happen to you, the reader. You'll have your own things. But we so want to believe that all of this stuff is so much more pristine than it is, and we're so quick to feel shame and guilt, when actually what we're going through is just some version of what everyone else has gone through too. We just didn't know it. We didn't talk about it.
Right. Right. So I think I think it's great that you've done this and that you wrote it that way, and I hope that a whole lot of people come across this book in this interview and go out and read the book and start to see that, it's not so bad.
It's not so bad.
It's not so bad to break down in tears even
Mhm.
multiple times a day if that's what you need to do. It's not so
No.
bad if things start to fall apart and you handle them as well as you possibly can. And maybe sometimes not as well as you possibly can because we're all human.
Right.
And this is all part of life too, and pretending that it's not doesn't help anybody.
Yes. Very much. Very
Yeah.
much.
So I think it's amazing that you had the strength to write this book in the first place on top of living through it.
Yeah.
and I think it's fabulous that you're doing the grief educator program, and I think you'll be amazing at it.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. I do want to share with everyone the name of the book one more
Yes,
time, if that's
absolutely.
okay?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So the book is called Carrying the Tiger, as in picking up a tiger and carrying it. My name is Tony Stewart. My website, TonyStewartAuthor.com, and it's available everywhere. Amazon, everywhere.
And I will put all of the links in the show notes too to make them easy to find.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
yeah, but thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I think this has been a really, really interesting conversation. That's our show. Thanks so much to Tony Stewart and to you. Tony's links are in the show notes, and you can find Carrying the Tiger at your favorite bookseller. I hope you'll leave a review for this episode. There's a link in your podcast app, and it is super easy, and it really makes a difference. If you enjoyed our conversation, please do share it with a friend. Thank you so, so much. If this episode resonated with you, or if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, join me at The Spark on Substack as we form a community that supports and celebrates each other's creative courage. It's free, and it's also where I'll be adding programs for subscribers and listeners. The link is in your podcast app, so sign up today. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners.